Well, hey everybody, and welcome to Children's Church. This week in Children's Church, we're going to continue our study of Genesis, and we're going to talk about the Promised Land. The Promised Land, or the land of Canaan, is first promised to Abram in chapter 12 of Genesis. Abram is just hanging out in Ur of the Chaldees, and God says, Abram, I want you to get up, and I want you to take all your people and all your stuff, and I want you to go to this new land that you've never seen, and it's going to be yours. And Abram says, okay, because that's the kind of person Abram was. Abram trusted God. And then in chapter 15, God makes another promise to Abram. In chapter 15, what's happened before chapter 15, Abram and his nephew Lot, Lot had gone with him whenever he left Ur of the Chaldees, but then they'd separated because their servants were fighting with each other, and whenever they were taking care of animals. So Lot was living in one place, and Abram was living in another place. And Lot's family it's like in a movie. Lot's family was taken by these bad kings, and Abram finds out about it, and he goes and he rescues Lot. And then, again, this is like a movie. This is so exciting. In chapter 15, it tells us that after Lot was safe again, and after Abram rescued him, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Don't be afraid, Abram, for I am your shield. I am your great reward. But then Abram started complaining a little bit and questioning God. He said, God, how can you be my great reward? How can you bless me when I don't have any kids? And Abram was getting kind of old to be having any kids at this time. But then this is what God said to him in verse 5. God took him outside and said, look up at the heavens and count the stars if you can. And then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Like, see how many stars are up in the sky? That's how many descendants you're going to have. So then in chapter 6, verse 6, it says, Abraham believed God. And then God credited it to him as righteousness. The fact that even though it was not likely, based on human knowledge, for Abram to have any kids at that point, God said he was going to, and Abram believed him. He believed that that's what was going to happen. And Isaac, that land, that Canaan, that's when God said that your descendants, the ones that are going to be like the stars of the heaven, are going to inherit that promised land. And Abram was kind of around there. He didn't really stay in one place, but he stayed pretty much in Canaan. He did go to Egypt for a while when there was a famine, when there wasn't a lot growing. But he did, after he got to the promised land, he did pretty much stay there for the rest of his life. His son, Isaac, his promised son, settled in Canaan, and Jacob stayed in Canaan except for when he and Esau were into it, and then he came back and stayed in Canaan. But when the book of Genesis ends, the Israelites, or Abraham's descendants, are not in Canaan. They've had to go back to Egypt for food. So when the book is over, the promised land, the promised people are not in the promised land. But God knew that was going to happen. In fact, he told Abram that was going to happen. Still in chapter 15, going down to verse 12. Again, this is so neat. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves. Who's going to do it? They're not going to rise up against them. God is going to punish that nation. And afterwards, they will come out with great possessions. You, Abram, you, however, will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age. So God's telling Abram what's going to happen. He's like, listen, you're going to follow me. You're going to have these great descendants. And they're not always going to be in this promised land, but I'm going to take care of them, and I'm going to bring them back. And like it says in verse 6, Abram believed God, and God credited it to him as righteousness. So what does that mean for us? We may not always see where God's leading us, but if we trust him, like Abram trusted him, and if we follow him, God's got a plan, and it's all going to be okay. So I hope you have a good week, and until next time, see you later.